Hello there. This is Paul Glumaz, a 40-something year veteran with the LaRouche movement. Today is the 25th of November. In a few days from now, Donald Trump will be meeting with Xi Jinping in Argentina and possibly Putin as well. Now I'm going to say something. This is the most terrifying moment in my life. This is the most terrifying times I've ever been in. And let me tell you, I've been around. The reason it's the most terrifying times is because the empire is collapsing. And any one of a number of things could totally collapse the empire altogether. The question is, what it replaces it? What economic system replaces it? What system of relations among nations replaced this collapse? We don't know yet. It hasn't been determined. And that's what makes it so scary. That's why I am very scared. And I don't know if you're very scared, but I'm very scared. Now, the three big situations that could break the system. One is Brexit. In Brexit, it's the question of whether the City of London will have control over Europe or not. The second that could break everything is if Donald Trump were to declassify the communications that he's been threatening to declassify surrounding the FISA warrant, the coup attempt on him. Were he to do that, the role of the British intelligence and the British is so prominent in those declassifications, would be so prominent in those declassifications, as to blow apart completely the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain, and the United States and the intelligence community with the other Five Eyes, Britain, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. That's the cornerstone of the system right there. To blow it apart, it will blow apart. Perhaps Trump is doesn't want to blow it apart at this time. Perhaps he's a little scared to blow it apart at this time. Perhaps he's waiting for a better opportunity to blow it apart. I don't know. But that's one of the things that could blow everything apart. The third thing that could blow everything apart is the Saudi Arabia situation. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is reneging on the whole IPO for Aramco, and the money that was going to be gathered from the IPO was supposed to go into a Saudi public investment fund that would grow to $2 trillion, and that fund would be the piggy bank of piggy banks for the financial system that's going under, and all of that is not coming off, and there's a big freak out going on because it appears that they wanted this guy to be able to, quote, modernize Saudi Arabia, right? And this is when their modernization plan was to get a hold of all the loot, to get a hold of all those funds that, and so forth. So this isn't going very well, and Israel's in deep trouble. And France, Macron, who's a fascist, by the way, in the old French tradition of Vichy, they're burning up Paris right now. Hey, why? Because he's telling people, drop dead. We're going to cut everything. We're going to cut we're going to cut you out. You're going to impose massive austerity on you, and we're going to use the French police to make sure that you stay. That you ultimately accept it, and the people are not accepting it. There's the yellow vest movement. The farmers are joining it. The trade unionists are joining it. This whole thing is, France is exploding because of the austerity conditions, because of the budget cuts, right? The cornerstone of the world system that has governed this world is blowing apart. So then that brings me to the whole question of Donald Trump. And the question of what picks up the pieces. What picks up the pieces? Well, the only thing that can pick up the pieces is an agreement among nations to create a new system. And so this is the question of the nation. What is a nation? What is the nation? And then why did Trump, in formulating the concept of make America great again, what was he talking about? Was he talking about making the empire great again, or was he talking about making America great again? And then at the United Nations, in the first one, and then the more stridently in the second one, he said he is against global governance. He's against the Paris Climate Treaty. He's against the World Court. He's against the TPP. He's against the World Trade Organization. That's all global governance. Okay? He's against all that. He's for every nation being themselves and being respected as a nation, and for every nation to promote its own dreams. So what does that mean? Because it's only the nations coming together around a policy of what to do can you deal with this collapsing system. So that the rest of this tonight, the rest of this few minutes I have with you, I'm going to go into the question of what is a nation and where did it come from. Okay. So the concept of the nation state, at its core, is a poetic metaphor. Wow. Did you really say poetic metaphor? Yes, I did. And this is the most important thing that needs to be understood. This poetic metaphor is the best product of Western civilization, going back to the ancient Greeks. Yes, we're talking about dead white European males. The best product of dead white European males. The problem for something like the nation state is posed originally in St. Augustine's City of God, and the failures of the Roman Empire, the destruction that the Roman Empire wrought upon the human race. And what St. Augustine calls for is a new Rome, what he called the City of God, a new Roman Empire based on Christian virtue. So 450 years later, an attempt was made to implement St. Augustine's idea by Charlemagne. And he consolidated such an entity around 800 AD. And it resulted in 200 years of pulling Europe out of the collapse that the Roman Empire's disintegration created. But unfortunately, by 1200 AD, it had been totally corrupted with wars, crusades, and the role of the leading financial people in that time, Venice. So the collapse from that period posed a fundamental question of what the problem was. And the problem was that the only people who were educated, their language was Latin. There was no way for the average person to have access to anything conceptual or ideas or education unless they learned Latin. But no one spoke Latin except the scholars, the priests, and so forth. So, and those were very few. So Dante Alighieri began a campaign in the 1300s, early 1300s, one of the greatest poets of all time, to develop what was known as a vernacular language, Italian. Italian was very much a series of dialects a relative small vocabulary. And what he did was brought it all together through his poetic works, the most important one known as the Divine Comedy, which is still a very powerful work. But he also created this concept of a republic in the form of something he called the monarchy or demonarchia. And in his concept of the monarchy is the beginning of a concept of a humanist prince, that the monarchy is responsible to the people, responsible for the welfare of the people. But he added something very profound, something very different. He added a cultural figure of a metaphor of a beautiful woman, and her name is Beatrice. And Beatrice is very unique. She's not your typical woman. She is the image of a woman who is educated, knowledgeable, wise, but very strong, and represents reason and virtue. The power of the good is combined with the power of beauty. And Beatrice is the personality, the mythical personality, who brings Dante out of the purgatory into heaven. And she embodies everything virtuous, good, beautiful, righteous, uncorrupted, and truthful. And all in the form of a metaphor of a beautiful woman. This is unique. So, and along with this development, all over Europe was every area of Europe was developing a literate vernacular language that could be used as a vehicle for imparting profound ideas in the population, and moving away from Latin. Okay, so during this period, you have perpetual wars in the 1300s. You had mercenary armies coming out of the Crusades. You have perpetual wars into the 1400s called the 100 Years' War. Humanist educators were developing the concept of the humanist prince, a revolutionary conception in which the monarch is not a divine right monarch, but is responsible to all the people, their future, their well-being, their development, their general welfare. And this was the beginnings of the establishment of the idea of a monarch who represents the general welfare, and promoting the good as Augustine proposed, but not in the form of a Holy Roman Empire, but in the form of the prince, the humanist prince. But the issue then is how these ideas were going to be incorporated into the relatively non-literate, population. So, serfs were the property of the lords. The lords in the 100 Years' War would shift sides, go against the king, then work with the king, and you had you had three popes. It was a total mess. There was no principle governing relations beyond family, region, class, with the church being the referee. But Dante and his movement and the idea of the humanist prince were joined in popular culture by the troubadours, who sang of a beautiful, non-carnal love, non-corrupt love, of a world of beauty and without corruption, a world that did not exist in the real world, but which existed in the singing of the troubadours. And Friedrich Schiller references this in his poem, the Artist, the role of the artist in creating man. And in this context, and in this moment, in the early 1400s, a singularity occurred that still baffles people to this day. A young teenage girl, Joan of Arc, went to the besieged King of France and requested that he put her in charge of the armies to throw the English occupiers out of France. That singularity conforms to 2 centuries of preceding cultural developments and Dante's Beatrice. And thus the modern concept of the nation-state was born in a metaphor of a beautiful, uncorrupted representative of the good in a beautiful woman. And the soldiers fought for France because she was France. She was the principle of what France is. Her represent emotionally, spiritually, and visually, she was France. She represented France. Though she was betrayed by the French king, she nonetheless was tortured. She did not recant, that's very important, and she was burned at the stake. And her example became the basis, in part, of the powerful metaphor of the nation, which includes the vernacular language, its best poets and music, and the other artistic metaphors that language, culture could bring. And most of all, the unity of beauty with the good, with the state. With the sovereignty of that state to act for the good. This, and act for the general welfare. Or as it became known, the Commonwealth. That's what they call themselves during after the Renaissance. Today, Macron, the president of France, probably realized that he was spitting on her grave, Joan of Arc's grave, when he attacked Trump for nationalism. And he probably knows that. True patriotism is not xenophobia. It's not my country versus yours. True patriotism is powerful emotion of love. A passion which, while it can and has been abused, is in essence the primary means to combat the corruption of family, tribe, clan, and other kinds of selfishness. That is the basis of the metaphor. That is the basis of what a nation state is. It's that metaphor. It's that powerful sense of a bigger self, and that bigger quality is the future also, because the nation embodies the future. The nation is the unity. It's all. It's all that belong to that language, culture, or belong to that. And that future is connected to the individual. All campaigns against the idea of nationalism that have been run by the British are campaigns to convince people that the wars that were going on were caused by national pride. That fascism in Germany was national pride. That fascism in Spain was national pride. Hiding, of course, the hidden hands that created Hitler. The hidden financial hands. At one time it was the Venetians who were the hidden hands, later the Dutch, and still later the City of London today. The Renaissance came as part of the package of the original creation of the nation, the idea of the nation. But no nation could survive, no emerging nation could survive without science and technology and citizen militias. Scientific technological progress and citizens' militias became the weapon of defense for the concept of the sovereign nation. Brunelleschi, Leonardo da Vinci began a scientific revolution. Machiavelli develops the concept of citizen militias to allow the emerging city-states to protect themselves from the marauding mercenary armies of the nobles. From this emerges the concept of a citizen, as opposed to a subject or a serf. The emergence of citizens is the basis for the future revolutions that include our own revolution, the American Revolution. You just don't have a poetic metaphor, but the emerging skilled working class that is also armed to defend itself from the corrupt oligarchy and its hired killers. Today, we see this cultural and economic assault on the backbone of our nation. The skilled working class, at the core of our citizens, is being thrown on the scrap heap. And the end of the citizen soldier for the volunteer or mercenary soldier, killing involved in dozens of wars and skirmishes all over the planet, in Africa, Ukraine, the Middle East, Central Asia. You don't hear about it in the media, what is going on, till a veteran coming back commits suicide, and then no one wants to talk about it. France under Louis the 11th was the first nation around 1440, became the first Commonwealth or humanist prince. Several decades later, Bolingbroke was sponsored by humanist France to become Henry VII and the Tudor of England, and the Tudor Renaissance began. The cultural basis for our American Revolution is the Tudor Renaissance. Then, an alliance of England and France, with a weaker Spain, declared war on the financial center of the oligarchy, Venice, and came close to wiping Venice out. This was about 1500 AD, and it was called the League of Cambrai. Had that occurred, Europe would not have been drowned in religious wars for 150 years, allowing the feudal and financial oligarchy to become stronger, to transition towards a new system of empire out of Venice into the northern Atlantic, in Holland and later Britain. We are similarly situated today. The failure of the major nations to come together to wipe out the modern Venetian system will plunge humanity into wars, etc., that will probably never end. The stakes are high now. Only sovereign nations can agree to replace the system that has financially enslaved nations. Is this at all implied in Trump's America, Make America Great Again? The concerns of Renaissance leaders in the 15th and 16th centuries over the problems of European oligarchy and peasantry led to creating a colonization of new world settlements that would grow outside of feudal and financial oligarchical control. That was the foundation of our nation before it became a nation, in resisting the new colonial looting of the new Venetian financial system called London. Still today, at that time under the British East India Company, today is the City of London. The modern assault on the nation state. The assassination of Lincoln and the 4 years of Andrew Johnson as president in part prevented Lincoln's plan to dismantle the British Empire forever. The early death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt prevented the similar thing from happening. The assassination of John F. Kennedy also presented a similar consequence of the dismantling of that empire. The sovereign powers of the nation, working in collusion with other sovereign powers, can crush any and all empires and all oligarchs. The Treaty of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War in 1648, put forward that principle of sovereignty and the win-win concept of a state to end the carnage that ravaged Europe for 150 years. The following century after the Treaty of Westphalia, there was relative peace. And that relative peace allowed for Bach and the German Renaissance, and also Benjamin Franklin, who was born in 1706, and most of all Leibniz, who lived in this period, to flourish. This period of peace allowed for the development of the colonies, as Franklin led the colonies to essential independence by 1754-1763. Tony Blair in 1999 announced the end of the Westphalian system, and that the world was entering the post-Westphalian system, and that the new global system of the right of the global community to militarily intervene to protect so-called the people signaled an end to that system. Tens of millions, if you count Central Africa, and 20 years later, tens of millions of refugees. And Donald Trump announces, "Make America great again and end the end of global governments." Is that what he means? A return to the Westphalian system. Without a nation, without participating in the future of a nation, you are soulless. You have no purpose for existence. This is where the modern philosophical movements of existentialism and phenomenology attack the philosophical underpinnings of reason, of the good, of the nation. This is what we've been subjected to over the last period. And that is why Donald Trump is hated, because he's attacking that implicitly. And this is our opportunity to bring back that nation. But also there's another aspect of the nation state, which is the notion of beauty. You cannot have a nation without revival of classical culture. The Chinese are bringing European classical culture to their people because they know how vital it is. We need to bring our classical culture back as well.